The marble floors of the Moretti mansion gleamed under the crystal chandeliers, each surface polished to perfection for tonight's momentous occasion. I moved through the grand ballroom with practiced efficiency, my worn sneakers silent against the cold stone as I adjusted the final arrangements of white roses and baby's breath. The scent of expensive perfume and cigar smoke already lingered in the air, a preview of the evening to come. My uniform felt heavier today, the plain black dress with its crisp white apron that marked me as what I was. Help. Invisible. Expendable. I tucked a strand of dark hair behind my ear, checking my reflection in the polished silver of a serving tray. 25 years old, and I still looked like the frightened girl who had crossed the border 3 years ago with nothing but a prayer and her grandmother's rosary. "Luna," Maria's sharp voice cut through my thoughts. The head housekeeper appeared around the corner, her gray hair pulled into its usual severe bun, clipboard clutched to her chest like armor. "Table 12 needs new centerpieces." The Rossetti daughter knocked over the vase with her dramatic gesturing. I nodded, hurrying to the supply closet. Tonight was the night that would change everything for the Moretti family, and possibly end my time here. Don Salvatore Moretti, Luca's father, had decreed that his son must choose a bride from among the daughters of their allied families. 100 of the most powerful Mafia families in America had sent their unmarried daughters, each hoping to become the next Mrs. Moretti. The irony wasn't lost on me. While these women competed for the attention of a man they barely knew, I had fallen hopelessly in love with the very person they sought to claim. As I arranged fresh flowers, my mind wandered to the first time I'd seen Luca Moretti. I'd been scrubbing floors in the East Wing when he'd walked past, his presence commanding attention even in casual clothes. Dark hair perfectly styled, green eyes that seemed to see everything, a jawline that could cut glass. He'd paused, looked down at me on my hands and knees, and said simply, "You missed a spot." But he'd smiled when he said it, transforming his entire face from intimidating to devastating. That was 3 years ago. 3 years of stolen glances, brief conversations in passing, and the gradual realization that Luca Moretti was nothing like the cold, calculating man the world saw. He left books in Spanish on the kitchen counter after learning I was teaching myself to read English. He always asked about my family in Mexico, remembering my youngest brother's name and my mother's arthritis. When I'd caught a terrible flu last winter, he'd personally driven to the pharmacy at midnight to get my medicine. But tonight, all of that would end. He would choose one of those beautiful, educated, wealthy women, and I would return to Mexico with enough money saved to start a small business. It was what I'd always planned. What I should want. The sound of expensive heels clicking against marble announced the arrival of the first guests. I peeked through the service door, watching as a stunning blonde in a red Valentino gown swept into the ballroom, diamonds glittering at her throat and ears. Behind her came a brunette in emerald silk, then a redhead in midnight blue. Each more beautiful than the last, each carrying herself with the confidence that came from generational wealth and power. These were Luca's peers, his equals, women who understood his world of family obligations, territorial disputes, and the weight of legacy. Women who could stand beside him at charity galas and family meetings, who could navigate the treacherous waters of Mafia politics with a smile and a carefully placed word. I was just the maid who brought him coffee in the morning and made sure his shirts were pressed exactly how he liked them. "Luna, stop gawking and get back to work," Maria hissed, appearing beside me. "The Morettis will be down soon, and everything must be perfect." I retreated to the kitchen, where controlled chaos reigned. Chef Roberto barked orders in rapid Italian, while his staff plated hundreds of canapes with military precision. I fell into the familiar rhythm of work, arranging serving trays and polishing champagne flutes until they sparkled. "Have you seen him yet?" whispered Sophia, one of the newer maids, as she bumped my shoulder conspiratorially. "They say he looks like a movie star in his tuxedo." My chest tightened. I'm sure he looks very handsome. Maria says he has to pick someone tonight. Can you imagine? All those rich princesses fighting over one man? She giggled, unaware of the knife her words twisted in my heart. I heard the Russian girl brought a dowry worth $50 million. $50 million. The number echoed in my head as I continued my tasks. I sent $300 home to my family every month, nearly every penny I earned. In my entire lifetime, I would never see even a fraction of that amount. How foolish I'd been to think, even for a moment, that a man like Luca could see anything in someone like me. The kitchen door swung open, and Vincent Torino strode in, his bulk filling the doorway. Don Salvatore's right hand and enforcer, Vincent had always made my skin crawl. His small, dark eyes swept the room before landing on me with an expression I couldn't quite read. You. He pointed a thick finger in my direction. Luna, isn't it? I nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. In 3 years, Vincent had never spoken directly to me. Don Salvatore wants to see you in his study, now. The champagne flute I'd been polishing slipped from my nervous fingers, shattering against the floor. Around me, the kitchen fell silent, except for the hiss of sautéing onions and the distant sound of arriving guests. Clean that up first, Vincent added with cold amusement. Can't have the help leaving messes. My hand shook as I swept up the broken glass, each shard catching the overhead lights like tiny accusations. Why would Don Salvatore want to see me tonight of all nights? Had I done something wrong? Was I being fired? The walk to his study felt like a death march. My footsteps echoed in the marble hallway, past portraits of stern-faced Moretti ancestors who seemed to judge me with their painted eyes. I paused outside the heavy oak door, smoothing my uniform and taking a deep breath before knocking. Enter. Don Salvatore sat behind his massive desk, looking frailer than I'd seen him since his heart attack 6 months ago. His once powerful frame had withered, but his eyes remained sharp as a hawk's. Beside him stood Luca, magnificent in his black tuxedo, his hands clasped behind his back. He didn't look at me when I entered. Luna, Don Salvatore's voice carried the rasp of a lifetime smoker. You've been with our family for 3 years. Yes, sir. My voice came out as barely a whisper. You've been faithful, hard-working, discreet. He leaned forward, studying me with those penetrating eyes. These are rare qualities. I remained silent, unsure where this conversation was heading. My son faces an important decision tonight, he continued. He must choose a wife from among our allies' daughters. It is tradition. It is business. It is survival. My heart cracked a little more with each word. Beside him, Luca's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. But tradition sometimes blinds us to what is truly valuable, Don Salvatore said slowly. What we have right in front of us. The old man's words hung in the air like smoke. I glanced at Luca, who finally met my eyes. Something passed between us in that moment, a look so intense it made my knees weak. Pain, longing, and something that looked almost like desperation. You may go. Don Salvatore dismissed me with a wave of his hand. The evening awaits. I curtsied awkwardly and turned to leave, my mind reeling from the cryptic conversation. But as I reached the door, Luca's voice stopped me. Luna. I turned back, hope blooming foolishly in my chest. You look beautiful tonight, he said softly, his green eyes holding mine. You always do. Heat flooded my cheeks as I mumbled a thank you and fled the room. In the hallway, I pressed my back against the cool wall, trying to calm my racing heart. What had just happened? Why had Don Salvatore wanted to see me? And why had Luca looked at me like I mattered? The sound of approaching voices forced me back into motion. I hurried toward the kitchen, but not before catching a glimpse of the ballroom through the main doors. It was a fairy tale scene. Hundreds of guests in designer gowns and perfect tuxedos, champagne flowing like water, and at the center of it all, the most eligible bachelor in the criminal underworld. Soon, he would choose his bride from among the beautiful, accomplished women who filled that glittering room. And I would go back to being invisible, just another servant in the shadows of their perfect world. If only I knew that in less than an hour, Luca Moretti would turn that perfect world upside down with 5 simple words that would change everything. I choose Luna as my wife. The ballroom had transformed into a glittering battlefield. I watched through the service door as 100 of the most beautiful women I'd ever seen circulated through the crowd, each more stunning than the last. The Torino daughter wore a gown that probably cost more than my family's house, while the Benedetti girl's jewelry could fund my village's school for a decade. They moved with the grace of trained dancers, each conversation a carefully choreographed performance designed to catch Luca's attention. And Luca, God help me, he was magnificent. The black tuxedo fit him like it had been painted on, emphasizing his broad shoulders and lean waist. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and when he smiled politely at something one of the candidates said, I felt my heart clench with jealousy so fierce it took my breath away. Stop torturing yourself, Maria muttered, appearing beside me with a tray of dirty glasses. He's not for you, mija. The sooner you accept that, the better. But I couldn't look away. I watched as the Russian girl, Katerina Volkov, practically draped herself over Luca's arm, her platinum blonde hair catching the chandelier light like spun gold. She was everything I wasn't, tall where I was short, pale where I was olive-skinned, sophisticated where I was simple. When she laughed at something he said, the sound was like crystal bells. The Volkov girl is the favorite, whispered Sophia, joining our illicit observation. I heard Vincent tell Chef Roberto that her father controls the entire East Coast shipping operation. The marriage would unite 2 of the most powerful families. My stomach churned. Of course. This wasn't about love or even attraction. This was business, pure and simple. Luca needed to choose the woman who would bring the most strategic advantage to the Moretti Empire. And what could a Mexican maid possibly offer that these princesses couldn't? Luna. Chef Roberto's voice cracked like a whip. Stop daydreaming and get these appetizers to table 6 before they get cold. I grabbed the heavy tray, balancing it carefully as I pushed through the service door into the ballroom proper. The noise hit me like a wave. Hundreds of conversations in multiple languages, the clink of crystal, the rustle of expensive fabric. The air was thick with competing perfumes and the underlying scent of power and money. I kept my head down, weaving between guests with practiced invisibility. Most barely registered my presence, their attention focused on the evening's main event. But as I approached table 6, where the younger sons and daughters of minor families were seated, I caught fragments of conversation that made my blood run cold. Father says if Luca doesn't choose wisely, there could be war. The Chicago families are already making moves. Heard the old man might not make it through winter. War. The word echoed in my mind as I served the canapes with trembling hands. I'd always known the Morettis were powerful, but I'd been sheltered from the true reality of their world. Now, listening to these casual discussions of violence and territory, I began to understand the weight pressing down on Luca's shoulders. Excuse me, miss. A smooth, accented voice made me look up. A man in his 30s with sharp cheekbones and cold blue eyes was studying me with interest. You're the Moretti house staff, yes? Yes, sir, I replied carefully, recognizing him as one of the Eastern European guests. Dmitry Kozlov. He introduced himself with a predatory smile. I couldn't help but notice you seem familiar with the layout here. How long have you worked for the family? Something in his tone made me uncomfortable. 3 years, sir. Ah. His smile widened. And in 3 years, you must have observed much, heard much. Such a valuable position for a young woman. Before I could respond, a warm hand settled on my shoulder. I looked up to find Luca standing beside me, his presence immediately changing the entire dynamic of the conversation. "Dimitri," Luca's voice carried a subtle warning. "I trust you're enjoying the evening?" Of course. Dimitri's demeanor shifted instantly to one of deference. "Just complimenting your excellent service staff. Such attention to detail." "Luna is one of our most trusted employees," Luca said, his hand still resting protectively on my shoulder. "I'm sure she has duties to attend to." I nodded quickly, grateful for the rescue, and hurried away with my empty tray. But I could feel both men's eyes following me, and something about the exchange left me deeply unsettled. Back in the kitchen, I tried to lose myself in work, but my mind kept returning to Dimitri's questions and the way he'd looked at me, like I was a piece of valuable information rather than a person. What had he been fishing for? And why had Luca's intervention felt so protective? "They're calling for the announcement." Sophia burst through the kitchen doors, her eyes wide with excitement. "Don Salvatore is about to present the candidates." Despite myself, I found myself drawn back to the service door. The ballroom had reorganized itself, with all the eligible daughters arranged in a semicircle around a raised platform where Don Salvatore stood, looking every inch the patriarch despite his failing health. Luca stood beside him, his expression carefully neutral as he surveyed the sea of hopeful faces. "My friends," Don Salvatore's voice carried clearly through the hushed room. "Tonight, we gather not just to celebrate our alliances, but to forge the future of our families. My son, Luca, will choose his bride from among these remarkable young women, each representing the finest traditions of our world." A murmur of anticipation rippled through the crowd. I watched as each candidate straightened, preparing for their moment in the spotlight. Katerina Volkov smoothed her already perfect hair, while the Benedetti girl adjusted her necklace to catch the light just so. The choice he makes tonight will determine not just his personal happiness, but the direction of our family's legacy for generations to come, Don Salvatore continued. "It is a decision that cannot be made lightly." My heart hammered against my ribs as I watched Luca step forward. This was it. In moments, he would choose his future wife, and my foolish dreams would finally be laid to rest. But instead of approaching any of the beautiful women arrayed before him, Luca turned toward the back of the room. His eyes swept the crowd, searching, until they found mine through the crack in the service door. "Father," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. "I have made my choice." A collective intake of breath filled the ballroom. The candidates preened, each certain they were about to be selected. Katerina Volkov stepped forward slightly, her smile triumphant. "Bring her here," Luca said, still looking directly at me. Vincent appeared as if from nowhere, his bulk filling the doorway to the service area. "Come," he ordered gruffly. "Now." My legs felt like water as I followed Vincent through the ballroom. Every eye in the room tracked our movement, confusion rippling through the crowd as they tried to understand what was happening. The candidates' expressions shifted from confidence to bewilderment as I passed them in my simple black uniform. I reached the platform on shaking legs, acutely aware of how I must look in my plain work dress among all this finery. Don Salvatore's expression was unreadable, while Vincent looked like he'd swallowed something sour. But Luca looked at me like I was the only person in the room. "This is Luna Reyes," he announced to the stunned assembly. "She has served our family faithfully for 3 years. She is kind, intelligent, hardworking, and honest, qualities that are worth more than all the gold in the world." The silence was deafening. I could feel the shock and outrage radiating from the crowd like heat from a fire. Katerina Volkov's face had gone white with fury, while her father's expression promised violence. "She is also," Luca continued, taking my trembling hand in his strong, warm one, the woman I love, and if she will have me, she will be my wife. The ballroom erupted. Shouts of outrage in multiple languages filled the air as chairs scraped back and voices rose in anger. I stood frozen in the center of the chaos, Luca's hand my only anchor to reality. "This is an insult!" Katerina's father stepped forward, his face purple with rage. "You shame all our families with this mockery." "No!" Luca's voice cut through the noise like a blade. "I honor them by choosing with my heart instead of my ledger book." Vincent moved closer to the platform, his hand resting meaningfully inside his jacket. Around the room, other men made similar gestures, the threat of violence suddenly very real. "Luca," Don Salvatore's voice was quietly dangerous. "You understand what you're doing." "I do, Papa." Luca squeezed my hand tighter. "I understand perfectly." The old man studied his son for a long moment, then shifted his gaze to me. "And you, girl? Do you understand what you're agreeing to?" I found my voice at last, though it came out as barely a whisper. I don't understand any of this." Luca turned to face me fully, his green eyes intense with emotion. "Luna, I love you. I've loved you since the day you told me my tie was crooked and then had the courage to fix it yourself. I love your laugh, your kindness to everyone you meet, the way you sing while you work. I love that you send every penny home to your family, that you cry during sad movies, that you're not afraid to tell me when I'm being unreasonable." Tears blurred my vision as his words washed over me. "But Luca, I'm nobody. I'm just—" "You're everything," he interrupted firmly. "You're the only thing that matters." The chaos around us continued to rage, but in that moment, it felt like we were alone in the eye of a hurricane. Luca raised our joined hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to my knuckles. "Will you marry me, Luna Reyes?" he asked softly. "Will you let me spend my life trying to deserve you?" Through my tears, I saw the hope and vulnerability in his eyes. This powerful, dangerous man was laying his heart bare in front of hundreds of people, risking everything for a Mexican maid who couldn't offer him anything but love. But maybe, just maybe, love was enough. "Yes," I whispered, then louder. "Yes." The word yes had barely left my lips when the ballroom exploded into chaos. Katerina Volkov let out a shriek of rage that could have shattered crystal, while her father began shouting in rapid Russian, his face approaching an alarming shade of purple. The other candidates and their families weren't far behind, their outrage mixing into a cacophony of multiple languages, all expressing the same sentiment. This was an unforgivable insult. I stood frozen on the platform, still clutching Luca's hand, as the reality of what had just happened crashed over me like a tidal wave. These weren't just wealthy socialites I'd offended. These were the daughters and families of the most dangerous criminal organizations in North America. And I'd just humiliated every single one of them. "Get her out of here," Vincent growled, moving toward us with murder in his eyes. "This madness ends now." But Luca stepped protectively in front of me, his free hand disappearing inside his jacket. "Touch her, Vincent, and it'll be the last thing you do." "You think you can threaten me, boy?" Vincent's voice was deadly calm. "I've been protecting this family since before you could walk. I won't let you destroy everything your father built for some Mexican whore." The slur hit me like a physical blow, but before I could react, Luca moved. One moment Vincent was standing, the next he was on his knees, Luca's gun pressed against his temple with such speed, I barely saw it happen. "Apologize," Luca's voice was arctic. "Now." The ballroom had gone silent again, everyone holding their breath as they watched the heir to the Moretti Empire hold a gun to his father's most trusted advisor. Don Salvatore remained seated, his expression unreadable, making no move to intervene. "I apologize," Vincent ground out through clenched teeth, the words clearly bitter in his mouth. Luca holstered his weapon and helped Vincent to his feet with mock courtesy. Good. Now perhaps we can discuss this like civilized people. Civilized? Dmitry Kozlov stepped forward, his earlier friendliness replaced by cold calculation. There is nothing civilized about this farce. You humiliate our daughters, insult our families, and for what? A servant girl who probably can't even read? I can read, I said quietly, finding my voice at last. In 3 languages. Dmitry's eyebrows rose in surprise, but Katerina wasn't finished. She pushed through the crowd, her designer gown rustling with each aggressive step. You think you've won something? She spat, her accent thickening with rage. You think love is enough to protect you in our world? You're about to learn how wrong you are. Is that a threat? Luca's voice carried a dangerous edge that made several people step back. It's a promise, Katerina's father interjected. You've made enemies tonight, Moretti. Powerful enemies. That girl will be dead within the week. The casual way he spoke of my murder sent ice through my veins. I'd known the Morettis were involved in dangerous business, but I'd never truly understood the constant threat of death that surrounded their world. Now I was being dragged into it, all because of 5 foolish words. Yes, I will marry you. Enough. Don Salvatore's voice cut through the threats and posturing like a knife. The old man rose slowly from his chair, and despite his frail appearance, every person in the room gave him their complete attention. My son has made his choice. Whether it was wise or foolish remains to be seen, but it is done. Salvatore, Giuseppe Benedetti, one of the most powerful men in the room, stepped forward. Surely you're not going to allow this to stand. Our agreement. Was that my son would choose a bride tonight? Don Salvatore interrupted. He has done so. I made no promises about which bride he would select. The technical truth of his words sparked fresh outrage, but the old man wasn't finished. However, he continued, his gaze settling on me with uncomfortable intensity, the girl must prove herself worthy of the Moretti name. If she cannot adapt to our world, if she becomes a liability rather than an asset. He left the sentence hanging, but the implication was clear. What kind of proof? Luca demanded, moving protectively closer to me. She will live as one of us for 6 months, Don Salvatore declared. She will learn our ways, our customs, our business. If at the end of that time she has proven herself capable of being a Don's wife, the marriage will proceed with my blessing. And if she fails? Vincent asked, hope creeping into his voice. Don Salvatore's smile was cold as winter. Then the engagement will be dissolved, and Luca will choose again from tonight's candidates. My stomach dropped. 6 months. I had 6 months to transform from a simple maid into someone capable of standing beside one of the most powerful men in the criminal underworld. 6 months to learn skills I'd never dreamed of needing, to navigate a world where a wrong word could mean death. I accept, I said before I could lose my nerve. The words came out stronger than I felt, and I saw surprise flicker across several faces. You don't know what you're agreeing to, Katerina said with vicious satisfaction. Our world will eat you alive, little mouse. Perhaps, I replied, drawing on reserves of courage I didn't know I possessed. But I'm stronger than I look. Luca squeezed my hand, pride and worry warring in his expression. Around us, the crowd began to disperse, but I could feel their eyes on me, measuring, calculating, waiting for me to fail. The candidates and their families left with barely concealed hostility, their departure more like a strategic retreat than a surrender. As the ballroom emptied, I found myself alone with the Moretti family and their closest associates. The weight of what I'd just committed to pressed down on me like a physical thing, making it hard to breathe. Luna, Don Salvatore approached me, his cane tapping against the marble floor. Walk with me. I glanced at Luca, who nodded encouragingly, though I could see the tension in his shoulders. The old man led me out onto one of the mansion's many terraces, where the night air carried the scent of jasmine and the distant sound of the ocean. "Tell me," he said, settling onto a stone bench with a sigh of exhaustion. "Why do you love my son?" The question caught me off guard. I'd expected threats, warnings, perhaps tests of loyalty, not this gentle inquiry that seemed to pierce straight to my heart. "Because he sees me," I said finally. "In a world where I'm invisible to most people, he sees me. He remembers my brother's name, asks about my mother's health, notices when I'm sad. He's kind without expecting anything in return. And the power, the money, the status that comes with being his wife?" I shook my head. "I didn't know he was anything more than your son until tonight. I fell in love with the man who brings me books, who argues with me about movies, who makes me laugh until my sides hurt." Don Salvatore studied me in the moonlight, his expression unreadable. "You understand that kindness is often seen as weakness in our world? That the woman who stands beside my son must be strong enough to make hard choices, to protect what matters most, even when it costs her everything?" "I sent my 15-year-old brother to school, instead of to work in the fields," I said quietly. "I left everything I knew to come to a foreign country, so my family could have a better life. I've been strong my whole life, Don Salvatore. I'm just not sure I know how to be your kind of strong." "My kind of strong," he repeated thoughtfully. "And what kind is that?" "The kind that can order someone's death over dinner," I whispered. "The kind that can smile while planning someone's destruction. The kind that can choose duty over love, power over conscience." The old man was quiet for a long moment, and I wondered if I'd just sealed my fate with my honesty. "My wife," he said finally, "was a baker's daughter from Sicily, barely spoke English when I brought her to America. The other wives, they scorned her, said she wasn't good enough for a man like me." I looked at him in surprise. I'd seen portraits of the late Mrs. Moretti throughout the house. A beautiful woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. "Maria was never comfortable with the violence," he continued. "Never learned to enjoy the power or the fear. But she had something more valuable than either of those things." "What?" "She had the courage to humanize me, to remind me that beneath the dawn, the patriarch, the killer, there was still a man capable of love. His eyes, so like Luca's, fixed on mine. That is the kind of strength my son needs, Luna. Not the ability to be ruthless, but the wisdom to know when mercy is more powerful than vengeance." Before I could respond, footsteps announced Luca's approach. He appeared at the terrace doors, relief flooding his face when he saw me unharmed. "Papa, you're not interrogating my fiancé, are you?" "Just getting to know the girl who stole my son's heart," Don Salvatore replied, rising stiffly from the bench. "I approve of your choice, Luca, but the next 6 months will test both of you in ways you cannot imagine." As the old man made his way back inside, Luca gathered me into his arms, holding me close against his chest. I could feel his heart beating rapidly beneath his tuxedo jacket. "I'm sorry," he murmured into my hair. "I'm sorry for throwing you into this without warning, for putting you in danger, for asking you to give up your quiet life for this chaos. Are you taking it back?" I asked, pulling away to look at his face. "Never," he said fiercely. "Not if you'll have me. Not if you can forgive me for being selfish enough to want you despite the risks." I reached up to cup his face in my hands, this beautiful, dangerous man who had just upended both our lives for love. "Then we have 6 months to figure out how to make this work," I said. 6 months for you to teach me how to be worthy of the Moretti name." "You're already worthy," he said, leaning down to rest his forehead against mine. "You're more than worthy. You're everything I never knew I needed." As he kissed me there in the moonlight, with the weight of 100 threats hanging over our heads and an impossible future stretching before us, I tried to memorize the moment, because I had a feeling that the next 6 months would test not just my ability to adapt to his world, but our love's power to survive in it. The morning after the ball, I woke up in a bedroom that cost more than my family's annual income, wearing silk pajamas that still had their tags attached. My simple uniform had been whisked away during the night, replaced by a wardrobe that appeared as if by magic. Designer clothes in exactly my size, each piece worth more than I'd ever owned in my entire life. I stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror in what was now my dressing room, staring at a stranger. The woman looking back at me wore a tailored cream-colored blouse and charcoal slacks that hugged her curves in ways that made her look sophisticated, expensive, but her eyes, my eyes, were wide with terror and uncertainty. A soft knock interrupted my identity crisis. "Come in," I called, expecting one of the maids. Instead, an elegant woman in her 50s entered, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, and her navy suit screaming understated wealth. She moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to authority, her pale blue eyes assessing me with the thoroughness of a military inspection. "Luna Reyes," she said, her voice carrying a slight Italian accent. "I am Francesca Romano, your etiquette instructor. We have 6 months to transform you from a servant into a Don's wife. I suggest we begin immediately." My stomach dropped. "Transform me?" "Everything must change," Francesca said matter-of-factly, circling me like a predator sizing up prey. "Your posture, your speech patterns, your knowledge of our customs and traditions. You must learn to host dinner parties for 50 people, to conduct yourself at charity galas, to spot a federal agent at 50 paces. Spot federal agents? My voice came out as a squeak. Francesca's smile was sharp as a blade. "My dear girl, you're about to become the wife of one of the most wanted men in America. The FBI would love nothing more than to turn you into an informant. You must learn to recognize their tactics, their approaches, their weaknesses." The weight of my new reality pressed down on me like a physical thing. This wasn't just about learning proper etiquette and fashion. I was being trained to become a criminal's wife, to participate in a world of violence and illegal activities. "I can't," I whispered, sinking onto the velvet bench at the foot of the bed. "I can't do this. I'm not built for this world." "You think Maria Moretti was built for it?" Francesca asked, settling beside me with surprising gentleness. "She was younger than you when she married Salvatore, barely spoke English, terrified of her own shadow, but she learned, adapted, became one of the strongest women I've ever known." "What happened to her?" "Cancer, 3 years ago." Francesca's expression softened. "But she died knowing she had raised a son who understood the difference between power and cruelty, between leadership and tyranny. That was her greatest achievement." Before I could respond, another knock echoed through the room. This time it was Luca, looking devastating in a charcoal suit despite the early hour. His eyes found mine immediately, concern flickering across his features. "How is our student adapting?" he asked Francesca, but his gaze never left my face. "She's overwhelmed," Francesca replied honestly. "Which is understandable, but she has potential. Good bone structure, natural grace when she's not terrified, and intelligence in her eyes." "I'm sitting right here," I said dryly, finding my voice again. Luca's mouth quirked into that smile that never failed to make my heart skip. "Yes, you are, and you're beautiful." Heat flooded my cheeks, but Francesca was already standing, all business again. "Luca, I need her for 3 hours this morning. Posture, dining etiquette, and basic conversation skills. This afternoon, she has appointments with the stylist, the personal shopper, and the linguist." "Linguist?" I echoed weakly. "Your Spanish is excellent, your English very good, but you need to understand Italian fluently," Francesca explained. Many of our conversations will be conducted in the old language, especially when discretion is required. And tonight, Luca added, his expression growing serious, you'll attend your first family dinner. Vincent will be there, along with several other key associates. It's important that you make a good impression. My stomach churned with anxiety. What if I mess up? What if I say the wrong thing? Luca crossed the room in 3 quick strides, taking my hands in his warm, strong ones. Then we'll handle it together. You're not alone in this, Luna. I won't let anyone hurt you. The intensity in his voice reminded me why I'd said yes in the first place. Despite the terror, despite the impossible odds, I loved this man. And love, as my grandmother always said, could conquer anything, even mortal danger and federal investigations. The next few hours passed in a blur of instruction that left my head spinning. Francesca was a merciless teacher, correcting everything from the way I held my fork to the angle of my chin when speaking to social superiors. I learned that there were 17 different ways to arrange a place setting, each conveying subtle messages about the importance of the guests. I discovered that my natural tendency to look people directly in the eye was considered aggressive in certain social circles, while in others it was a sign of respect. You must read people constantly, Francesca explained as we practiced walking in heels that cost more than my monthly salary. Body language, tone of voice, the clothes they choose to wear, everything tells a story. In our world, the ability to read these stories can mean the difference between life and death. Our world, I repeated, still struggling with the reality of that phrase. I'm still not sure I understand what our world actually is. Francesca paused in her instruction, studying me with those sharp blue eyes. What do you think it is? Organized crime, I said honestly. The Mafia. Violence and illegal activities wrapped up in expensive suits and fancy restaurants. And what? What else? She pressed. What do you see when you look at Luca, at his father, at the way this household runs? I considered the question seriously. Protection, I said slowly. When my mother got sick last year, Luca made sure she had the best doctors in Mexico City, even though I never asked for help. When Mrs. Patterson from the flower shop was being harassed by those gang members, they suddenly stopped coming around after Vincent had a conversation with them. Exactly. Francesca nodded approvingly. We are not merely criminals, Luna. We are protectors, providers, guardians of our communities. Yes, we operate outside the law, but we have our own code, our own sense of justice. But people still die, I whispered. People still get hurt. People die in wars fought by governments too, she replied. People get hurt by legal businesses that pollute their water and steal their pensions. At least we're honest about who we are and what we do. The moral complexity of her words left me reeling. I'd grown up believing in clear lines between right and wrong, good and evil. But here in the Moretti mansion, surrounded by luxury built on criminal enterprise yet witnessing genuine care and protection, those lines seemed to blur and shift like smoke. By the time the afternoon appointments arrived, my head was pounding with information overload. The stylist, a tiny woman named Celeste who spoke in rapid-fire French, attacked my appearance with the fervor of a general planning a military campaign. My eyebrows were reshaped, my hair trimmed and professionally colored to bring out highlights I didn't know I had. A dermatologist appeared to assess my skincare needs, followed by a makeup artist who taught me techniques for creating natural beauty that required more products than I could count. The personal shopper, an impeccably dressed man named Marcus, had filled my new closet with a wardrobe suitable for every possible occasion. Casual wear for family dinners, cocktail dresses for business meetings, formal gowns for charity events, and exercise clothes for the physical training that apparently was also part of my education. Physical training? I asked weakly when Francesca mentioned it. Self-defense, weapons handling, situational awareness, she replied as if discussing the weather. A Don's wife must be able to protect herself and others when necessary. Weapons handling? The words came out as a squeak. Nothing too advanced initially. Basic handgun safety and accuracy, some knife work for close quarters. Vincent will handle that portion of your training. The thought of Vincent teaching me to kill people made my skin crawl. But before I could protest, Luca appeared in the doorway. "How's my beautiful fiancée surviving her first day of finishing school?" he asked, but I could see the concern in his eyes. "She's overwhelmed but resilient," Francesca answered for me, which is exactly what we expected. "Luna, you have 2 hours to rest before we need to prepare you for dinner. I suggest you use the time wisely." As Francesca swept out of the room, Luca settled beside me on the sofa, pulling me against his side with gentle hands. "Talk to me," he said softly. "What's going through your head?" "This morning I was a maid who sent money home to her family," I said, my voice muffled against his shoulder. "Tonight I'll be dining with men who've probably killed people, discussing business that could put me in federal prison." "You don't have to discuss business," Luca assured me. "You just have to be present, be charming, show them that you belong at my side." "But do I?" I pulled away to look at his face. "Belong at your side, I mean. Francesca is trying to turn me into someone I'm not, teaching me to be someone I'm not sure I can be." Luca cupped my face in his hands, his green eyes intense with emotion. "I fell in love with Luna Reyes, the woman who sings while she works, who cries at sad movies, who stands up to me when I'm being unreasonable. I don't want you to become someone else. I just want you to learn how to protect yourself in my world." "Your world," I repeated. "Will it ever become our world?" "That depends on you," he said honestly. "On whether you can find a way to be yourself while adapting to the realities of this life. It won't be easy, Luna. There will be times when you'll have to make choices that go against everything you were taught. Times when survival requires compromise. And if I can't, if I fail your father's test," something dark and dangerous flashed in his eyes, "then we'll find another way. I won't lose you, Luna. Not to my father's expectations. Not to this world's demands. Not to anything." The fierce conviction in his voice sent shivers down my spine. This was the man the criminal underworld feared, the heir to an empire built on violence and power. But he was also the man who brought me books and remembered my family's names. The man who was willing to risk everything for love. "Teach me," I said finally. "Not how to be someone else, but how to be myself in your world. Show me how to survive this without losing who I am." His smile was brilliant as he leaned down to kiss me, soft and sweet and full of promise. "We'll figure it out together," he murmured against my lips. "Starting with tonight." As he left to prepare for the evening, I remained on the sofa, staring out at the perfectly manicured gardens, where armed guards patrolled in careful patterns. In 6 months, I would either be planning my wedding to the most dangerous man I'd ever met, or I'd be planning my escape from a world that might already have changed me beyond recognition. Either way, there was no going back to the simple life I'd known. The maid named Luna Reyes was gone forever, replaced by someone I didn't yet understand. The question was, would the woman I became still be worthy of the love that had started this transformation? Only time would tell. 3 months into my education, I could load and fire a Glock 19 in under 4 seconds, distinguish between federal agents and genuine businessmen by their shoes alone, and conduct a dinner conversation in Italian while mentally cataloging the exits in any room. I'd also witnessed my first business meeting, a polite discussion in the mansion's library that ended with a rival family's representative leaving pale and shaking, having agreed to terms that were decidedly in the Moretti's favor. I was becoming someone I barely recognized, and it terrified me almost as much as it exhilarated me. The real test came on a rainy Thursday evening when Luca received a phone call that made his face go completely white. I was in the study, practicing my Italian with Alessandro, the language tutor, when Luca burst through the doors with an expression I'd never seen before. Pure, unadulterated panic. Luna, he said, his voice tight with control. We need to leave, now. What's wrong? I asked, immediately rising from my chair as Alessandro gathered his materials and melted away into the corridor. The Kozlovs have taken Sophia, Luca said, grabbing my arm and steering me toward the door. They're using her to get to you. The blood drained from my face. Sophia, my friend from the kitchen. The sweet girl who'd gossiped with me about the eligible daughters at the ball. They'd taken her because of me. They want to trade, Luca continued as we hurried through the hallways, Vincent and 3 other men falling into step behind us. Sophia for you. They've given us 2 hours to decide. There's nothing to decide, I said immediately, my voice steadier than I expected. We make the trade. Luca stopped so abruptly I nearly collided with him. Absolutely not. Luca, she's innocent in all this. She was taken because of me. Which is exactly why I won't hand you over to the Russians, he interrupted, his green eyes blazing. Do you have any idea what they'll do to you? What they'll use you for? What they'll do to Sophia if we don't, I shot back, drawing on the steel I'd been developing over the past months. She has a younger sister, Luca, a mother who depends on her income. You think I can live with myself knowing she died because I was too much of a coward to— This isn't about courage, Vincent interjected roughly. It's about strategy. We don't negotiate with the Russians. Ever. I turned to face Vincent, the man who'd called me a whore 3 months ago and had spent the week since grudgingly teaching me to kill. And what's your strategic solution? Let them torture an innocent girl to death? Better her than you, he said bluntly. You're going to be the Don's wife. She's replaceable. The casual cruelty of his words hit me like a physical blow, but instead of cowering, I felt something cold and hard crystallize in my chest. This was the moment Francesca had warned me about, when I would have to choose between my old moral certainties and the pragmatic brutality of this world. No, I said quietly. No one is replaceable. Don Salvatore appeared at the end of the hallway, moving faster than I'd seen him move in months. His face was grim as he approached our group. The Russians are getting bold, he said without preamble. They think our family has gone soft, that a Mexican maid has weakened our resolve. Papa, Luca began, but the old man held up a hand. They're wrong, Don Salvatore continued, his eyes fixed on me. But they won't believe it until we show them. Luna, what do you propose we do? The question caught me off guard. For 3 months, I'd been learning to follow orders, to defer to authority, to let the men make the dangerous decisions. Now the head of the family was asking for my opinion on a matter of life and death. We go to the meeting, I said, thinking quickly, but not to make the trade. We go to make them regret taking something that belongs to us. Vincent's eyebrows shot up. You want to start a war with the Russians? I want to end one before it begins, I corrected. They took Sophia to test our resolve, to see if sentiment makes us weak. We show them it makes us more dangerous. Luca was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. What exactly are you suggesting? I took a deep breath, barely believing the words that were about to come out of my mouth. I'm suggesting we make them wish they'd never heard the name Moretti, but first, we save Sophia. Don Salvatore's smile was sharp as a blade. Interesting. And how do you propose we accomplish both objectives? By giving them exactly what they think they want, I said, the plan forming even as I spoke. Me. Luna, no. Luca stepped forward, but I held up my hand. Let me finish. We give them me, but not the helpless maid they're expecting. We give them the woman you've spent 3 months training to be dangerous. Understanding dawned in Don Salvatore's eyes. A Trojan horse. Exactly. They want to use me against you? Let them try. But while they're focused on gloating over their prize, we take back what's ours and make sure they never make this mistake again. The room fell silent as the men processed my proposal. Vincent looked skeptical. Luca appeared torn between pride and terror, and Don Salvatore. Don Salvatore looked impressed. "It's dangerous," the old man said finally. "If something goes wrong, if they suspect deception." "Then you'll have a war anyway," I pointed out. "At least this way, we fight it on our terms." "The girl has a point," Vincent admitted grudgingly. "And if we're going to move, we need to move fast. They're expecting an answer in 90 minutes. Luca grabbed my shoulders, his face intense with emotion. "Luna, I can't ask you to do this. I won't ask you to put yourself in that kind of danger." "You're not asking," I said gently, reaching up to touch his face. "I'm choosing. This is what it means to be part of this family, isn't it? To protect our own, no matter the cost." "She's right," Don Salvatore said quietly. "And she's ready." The next hour passed in a blur of preparation. I was fitted with a wire so thin it was virtually undetectable, given a ceramic knife that would pass through metal detectors, and briefed on the layout of the warehouse where the exchange would take place. Vincent, to his credit, ran through every contingency he could think of, making sure I understood the signals and protocols. "Remember," he said as we prepared to leave, "you're not the scared maid anymore. You're a Moretti. Act like it." The warehouse district was exactly what I'd expected: dark, isolated, and full of shadows where anything could happen. As our convoy approached the designated building, I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, but my hands were steady. 3 months of training had prepared me for this moment, even if I'd never imagined I'd actually use it. "Last chance to change your mind," Luca said, as our car stopped a block away from the warehouse. I kissed him hard, pouring all my love and determination into the contact. "See you on the other side," I whispered. The warehouse was exactly as Vincent had described, a cavernous space filled with shipping containers and abandoned machinery. Dmitry Kozlov waited in the center of the floor, flanked by 6 armed men. And there, tied to a chair with blood on her face, was Sophia. My training kicked in immediately. I cataloged the positions of the guards, noted the exits, identified the weapons I could see. But underneath the tactical assessment, rage burned cold and bright. They'd hurt my friend. That was a mistake they were going to regret. "Luna Reyes," Dmitry called out as I approached, his voice echoing in the vast space. "So good of you to join us. I trust you understand the terms of our arrangement?" "I understand you made a serious error in judgment," I replied, my voice carrying further than it should have in the empty space, loud enough for the listening devices to pick up clearly. Dmitry's smile faltered slightly. "Brave words for a woman walking into a trap." "Who says I'm the one walking into a trap?" I asked, taking another step forward. That's when the lights went out. What followed was chaos in the darkness. Shouts in Russian, the crack of gunfire, the sound of running feet. I dropped to the floor and rolled behind a shipping container as trained, my ceramic knife already in my hand. Through the shadows, I could see muzzle flashes and hear Vincent's voice barking orders. A hand grabbed my shoulder and I spun, the knife cutting through the darkness until it met flesh. A man screamed and stumbled away, clutching his arm. Not Sophia. Wrong build, wrong voice. "Luna!" Sophia's terrified cry cut through the noise. I moved toward the sound, staying low, using the containers for cover. My night vision was better than I'd expected, another benefit of Vincent's relentless training. I found Sophia still tied to the chair, her eyes wide with terror but alive. Blessedly alive. "It's okay," I whispered, cutting her bonds with quick, efficient movements. "Can you walk?" She nodded, too shocked to speak. The gunfire was dying down now, replaced by the sounds of surrender and men calling for mercy in Russian. The Moretti soldiers had done their job with typical efficiency. As backup lights flickered on, illuminating the warehouse in harsh industrial brightness. I could see the aftermath of our strategy. Dmitri knelt in the center of the floor, his hands zip-tied behind his back, blood trickling from a head wound. His men were either dead or similarly restrained. The whole operation had taken less than 5 minutes. Luka appeared through the smoke and shadows, his eyes immediately finding mine across the warehouse floor. Relief flooded his face when he saw me standing unharmed beside Sophia. "Is it over?" Sophia whispered, clinging to my arm. "This part is," I replied, helping her walk toward the exit. But as we reached the warehouse doors, Dimitri's voice called out behind us, filled with venom and promise. "This isn't finished, Mexican whore. You think you can play in our world? You think you can threaten us and walk away? We'll destroy everything you love, starting with your precious family in Mexico." I stopped walking. Slowly, I turned back to face him, and in that moment, I felt the last vestiges of the frightened maid I'd once been finally die. In her place stood someone harder, colder, infinitely more dangerous. "Vincent," I called without taking my eyes off Dmitri. "Give me your gun." "Luna." Luka's voice carried a warning, but I held up my hand. "Give me your gun." Vincent, after a moment's hesitation, pressed his Glock into my palm. The weight of it was familiar now, comfortable. I walked back to where Dmitri knelt, the weapon held steady in my grip. "You made 2 mistakes tonight," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. "First, you took someone under my protection. Second, you threatened my family." I pressed the barrel of the gun against his forehead, watching his eyes widen with the realization that the woman standing before him was not the terrified servant he'd expected. "Please," he whispered. "I have children." "So does Sophia," I replied. "So will I someday. The difference is, my children will grow up knowing that their mother protected the people she loved." I pulled the trigger. The sound echoed through the warehouse like thunder, followed by absolute silence. Dimitri's body slumped forward, blood pooling beneath his head on the concrete floor. I handed the gun back to Vincent, my hands perfectly steady, and walked to where Luka stood staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Ready to go home?" I asked. He nodded slowly, something like awe in his eyes. "More than ready." As we left the warehouse, Sophia safely between us and the problem of the Russian threat permanently resolved, I realized that Don Salvatore's test was over. I had proven myself capable of being a Don's wife, not just through social graces and language skills, but through the willingness to kill to protect what mattered most. The woman who walked out of that warehouse was not the same person who had entered it an hour before. She was someone harder, more dangerous, perfectly suited to stand beside the most powerful man in the criminal underworld. She was, finally and completely, a Moretti. 6 weeks later, I stood in the same ballroom where Luka had first declared his love for me, but this time I wasn't wearing a maid's uniform. The wedding dress was a masterpiece of Italian craftsmanship, ivory silk that flowed like water, hand-sewn pearls that caught the light with every movement, and a train that seemed to go on forever. The same women who had sneered at me 6 months ago now curtsied when I passed, their daughters eyeing me with a mixture of fear and grudging respect. I had become everything they'd never imagined possible. The Mexican maid who'd risen to become the most powerful woman in organized crime. "You look beautiful, mija," my mother whispered in Spanish, tears streaming down her face as she adjusted my veil. She'd flown in from Mexico City the week before, still overwhelmed by the opulent world her daughter now inhabited. "Your father would be so proud." "I hope so, Mama," I replied, squeezing her hand. "I hope I'm still the daughter he raised." The truth was, I wasn't entirely sure anymore. The woman looking back at me from the mirror was polished, confident, dangerous in ways my parents could never have imagined. I'd killed a man 6 weeks ago and felt no remorse, only satisfaction that the threat to my family had been eliminated. I'd learned to read financial reports that detailed money laundering operations, to plan charity events that were really fronts for criminal enterprises, to smile while discussing matters that would horrify most people. But I'd also learned that love could exist in the darkest places, that loyalty could be its own form of morality, and that sometimes protecting the people you cared about required crossing lines you'd never imagined you could cross. "It's time," Francesca announced from the doorway, looking elegant in navy blue silk. Over the past 6 months, she'd become more than my instructor. She'd become something like a mother figure, guiding me through the transformation from servant to queen. The ballroom had been transformed into something from a fairy tale. White roses and baby's breath cascaded from every surface. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across the marble floor, and a string quartet played softly in the corner. But what struck me most was the guest list. Every major crime family in North America was represented, their attendance a clear signal that the Morettis had not only survived my unconventional addition to their family, but had grown stronger because of it. Even some of the daughters from the original ball were present, no longer competitors, but potential allies. Katerina Volkov had married into the Chicago organization and sent a wedding gift worth more than most people's houses, a peace offering that acknowledged my position in the hierarchy. As I walked down the aisle on my brother Miguel's arm, flown in specifically for the honor, I saw faces that had become familiar over the past months. Vincent, who'd grudgingly admitted I had good instincts for violence. Alessandro, my language tutor, who beamed with pride at how perfectly I now spoke Italian. The household staff who'd initially viewed me as an upstart interloper, but now treated me with the deference due their future mistress. And at the end of the aisle, standing beneath an arch of white roses, with the morning light streaming through the windows behind him, was Luca. He looked magnificent in his black tuxedo, his dark hair perfectly styled, his green eyes bright with emotion as he watched me approach. But what struck me most was his expression. Not just love, but profound respect. The man who could have married any woman in the world had chosen me, and 6 months later, he was more certain of that choice than ever. Don Salvatore stood beside his son, looking frailer than ever, but with pride radiating from every line of his body. He'd told me the week before that I'd exceeded his expectations, that I'd proven myself worthy not just of his son, but of the Moretti name itself. "Who gives this woman to be married?" Father Martinez asked when we reached the altar. "Her family does," Miguel replied in careful English. "And we do so with great pride." As Miguel placed my hand in Luca's, I felt the symbolic weight of the moment. I was leaving one life behind and stepping fully into another, accepting not just marriage but leadership, responsibility, and all the dark complexities that came with it. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of traditional vows and personal promises. But when Luca slipped the ring onto my finger, a perfect emerald surrounded by diamonds that had belonged to his grandmother, I felt something shift inside me. The last piece of the transformation clicking into place. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Father Martinez announced. "You may kiss your bride." Luca's kiss was soft and sweet and full of promise. But when he pulled away, he whispered something in my ear that sent shivers down my spine. "Welcome to your kingdom, my queen." The reception was a study in controlled celebration. Champagne flowed like water, the food was exquisite, and the gifts displayed on tables around the ballroom represented enough wealth to fund a small country. But underneath the festivity was the constant undercurrent of business, deals being negotiated through seemingly casual conversations, alliances being formed and reformed with every handshake. I moved through it all with the grace Francesca had drilled into me, accepting congratulations with the perfect balance of warmth and authority. I was no longer the terrified girl who'd been dragged into this world against her will. I was a willing participant, a partner in every sense of the word. "Mrs. Moretti," Giuseppe Benedetti approached me during the dancing, his earlier hostility replaced by careful respect. I owe you an apology for my behavior at the engagement announcement." "Think nothing of it," I replied graciously. "You were protecting your daughter's interests. I respect that." "Your handling of the Russian situation was impressive," he continued. "My associates in Chicago were quite taken with your directness." I smiled, the expression feeling natural despite its calculating undertones. "Sometimes the old ways are still the best ways." He nodded approvingly and moved away, but not before I caught him speaking quietly to his son about new leadership and changing times. Word of my actions had spread throughout the criminal underworld, establishing my reputation as someone not to be underestimated. As the evening wore on, I found myself standing on one of the terraces with Luca, looking out over the grounds where we'd had our first serious conversation about his world 6 months ago. "Regrets?" he asked softly, his arm around my waist. I considered the question seriously. 6 months ago, I'd been sending money home to Mexico, planning to return there eventually to open a small restaurant. I'd had simple dreams, modest goals, a clean conscience. Now I was married to a man who commanded an empire built on violence and fear, and I'd killed someone with my own hands to protect what I loved. "No," I said finally, and meant it. No regrets, but questions. Such as, what happens now? Do I just exist as your wife, or do I have a role to play in all this? Luca's smile was dangerous and beautiful. "You have whatever role you want, my love. Papa's stepping back from day-to-day operations, focusing on his health. Someone needs to take his place as the family's strategic mind. You, me for operations, muscle, territorial concerns," he agreed. "But strategy, long-term planning, relationship management with our allies." He turned to face me fully. "Those require a different kind of intelligence, the kind you've demonstrated you possess." The implication hit me like a lightning bolt. He wasn't just offering me a seat at the table, he was offering me co-leadership of one of the most powerful criminal organizations in America. "That's a lot of responsibility," I said carefully. "It is, and it's dangerous work. There will always be people who want to challenge us, who see our love as weakness instead of strength." His hand cupped my face gently. "But I can't think of anyone I'd rather have watching my back." Before I could respond, Vincent appeared in the doorway to the terrace, his expression urgent. "Boss, we have a situation. The Torinos are here, and they're asking for a private meeting." Luca's expression hardened instantly. The Torinos controlled territory in New Jersey and had been making aggressive moves toward Moretti interests for months. "Now?" I asked. "During our wedding reception? That's probably the point," Luca replied grimly. "Public venue, lots of witnesses. They think we can't refuse without looking weak." "Then we don't refuse," I said, my mind already working through the implications. "We take the meeting, but on our terms." Both men looked at me with interest. Vincent, in particular, seemed curious to see how I'd handle my first real test as the new Mrs. Moretti. "Bring them to Papa's study," I continued. "The room project's authority, and there are advantages to making them come to us rather than meeting on neutral ground." "And the nature of the meeting?" Luca asked. I smiled, feeling the cold calculation that had become second nature over the past months. "We listen to what they have to say, and then we remind them why it's a mistake to interrupt a Moretti family celebration." 20 minutes later, I sat beside Luca in Don Salvatore's study, still wearing my wedding dress, but with my grandmother's rosary wrapped around my wrist like armor. Across from us, 3 Torino family representatives sat with the careful posture of men, trying to project strength while sitting in their enemy's stronghold. "Congratulations on your marriage," Frank Torino, the family's underboss, said with false joviality. "Beautiful ceremony. Quite a surprising choice of bride." "Thank you," I replied before Luca could respond. "We're very happy. I'm sure you are, and I'm sure you understand that marriage often requires adjustments, compromises, new arrangements to keep everyone satisfied. Here it was, the real reason for their visit. They were testing whether my presence made Luca vulnerable, whether love had made him soft. "What kind of arrangements did you have in mind?" I asked, my voice perfectly pleasant. Frank smiled, clearly thinking he was dealing with a naive newcomer. "The shipping routes through Newark, for instance. The Morettis have had control for years, but times change. Perhaps it's time for a more collaborative approach." "Collaboration," I repeated thoughtfully. "An interesting concept. Tell me, Mr. Torino, what exactly are you bringing to this potential collaboration?" "Manpower, protection, local knowledge." "Things we already have," I interrupted smoothly. "So really, you're asking us to give up profitable territory in exchange for what? The privilege of avoiding a war?" Frank's mask slipped slightly, revealing the aggression underneath. "Wars are expensive, Mrs. Moretti. They disrupt business, harm families. Surely a new bride doesn't want her honeymoon interrupted by violence." I leaned forward slightly, my voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than shouting. "Mr. Torino, let me make something very clear. I didn't marry into this family to play house and plan dinner parties. I married into it to help it grow stronger, more powerful, more feared." The room had gone very quiet. Even Luca was watching me with fascination. "6 months ago, I was nobody," I continued. "A maid who cleaned floors and served drinks. But you know what I learned in those months of transformation? Power isn't inherited. It's taken. Respect isn't given. It's earned. And fear." I smiled and saw Frank actually flinch. "Fear is a choice." I stood, my wedding dress rustling like silk armor, and walked to the window overlooking the grounds where our wedding guests were still celebrating. "You made a choice tonight, Mr. Torino. You chose to come into my home, on my wedding day, and threaten my family. You chose to test whether my husband's love for me made him weak." I turned back to face him. "Would you like to know what I choose?" Frank was sweating now, clearly realizing he'd miscalculated badly. "I choose to give you a wedding gift," I said pleasantly. "Safe passage home tonight. Time to reconsider your position. An opportunity to remember why the Moretti name commands respect throughout this region." "And if we don't take your gift?" one of the other men asked. My smile widened. "Then you'll discover that the woman who killed Dmitry Kozlov 6 weeks ago was just getting started. Vincent, please escort our guests to their car. Make sure they understand the terms of my generosity." As the Torino representatives were led away, their bravado replaced by nervous glances and hurried footsteps, Luca stood and approached me with an expression of awe and desire. "That," he said, pulling me into his arms, "was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." "More beautiful than the wedding dress?" "Much more beautiful than the wedding dress," he murmured against my neck. "Though I have to admit, the combination of deadly threats and ivory silk is doing things to me." I laughed, the sound bright and clear in the aftermath of controlled violence. "Good thing we're already married, then." "Good thing indeed, Mrs. Moretti." Mrs. Moretti. The name still sent shivers through me, but now they were shivers of power rather than fear. I'd found my place in this dark, dangerous world, not by becoming someone else, but by becoming the fullest, strongest version of myself. As we rejoined our wedding reception, I caught sight of my reflection in one of the ballroom's mirrors. The woman looking back at me was radiant in her wedding gown, confident in her new role, ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. She bore little resemblance to the terrified maid who'd accidentally sent an ultrasound to the wrong number 6 months ago. But in her eyes, my eyes, I could still see traces of the girl who'd crossed the border, with nothing but hope and determination. She was still there, still part of who I'd become, still driving me to protect the people I loved and fight for what I believed in. The only difference was that now I had the power to win those fights, and I intended to use it.